Thanks, Beat, for doing this. Welcome to Conversations with BrandKnew. Um, to begin at the beginning, as I say, you want to take us through your growing up years and your early influences of childhood?
Yeah, sure. First of all, well, thank you for having me, and I'm really glad we got to connect from around the world. So thank you. Yeah, so I grew up in Switzerland, and in a small village in the Northeast, and my mother was an artist, and my father was a surgeon. So from the very beginning, I feel like the two sides of what I end up getting into kind of were present in my life. The sort of the artistic part, the not having any fear of the creative process of just kind of seeing where things go from my mom, but then also the more scientific aspect from my father. So also what I would say there is, having reasons for doing what you're doing and sort of rationalizing things. So those two, parts unknowingly, I feel like really kind of shaped my being. I wasn't really going to go into graphic design. I didn't even know that was a thing, until my father came home from a medical conference and sort of brought back a brochure. One of his colleagues' daughter went to this school called Art Center, which at the time had a campus in Switzerland. So I was just kind of blown away by that. My eyes were open to an entirely new world that I didn't really even know existed. So I spent a summer kind of putting together a visual portfolio, which I had. It wasn't that new to me in the sense that I'd always sort of dabbled in visual expressions with my mom in her studio. So I spent a couple months putting that together, and I applied and I got in. So that was really kind of the sort of aha moment, the kind of serendipitous, moment that sort of shapes your life. And then, what happened was, after 2 semesters at Art Center Europe, that school got closed down. So I ended up getting transferred to Pasadena, where the original Art Center was. So that was my journey from, in a few words, my journey from Switzerland to the United States. And then the way I ended up in New York is that I was just going to, stop in New York on my way home to Europe, and I met my wife and I got stuck, and here I am.
In fact, actually, you answered the second question as well, because I wanted to understand your journey into design. Was it accidental discovery? Was it planned and restructured? So thank you. I think you combined your answer in the second question as well. You referred to brands as citizens, Beat, right? Is it the omnipresence of brands in our zeitgeist which is inspiring you to actually offer this narrative?
Well, I feel like I think that's part of it. I also think that if you look at the way brands communicate in our public spaces, I feel like more and more they're being forced to, or they're being permitted to take a stand on cultural issues of the time, and in that sense, obviously they're not citizens in the sense that they can vote, but I feel like they are so omnipresent in our lives, and we are actually through social media mostly, we're able to have conversations with brands on a very personal level. So I feel like, for all intents and purposes, they
The
are
train is
citizens.
meeting.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, on top of that, I mean, in the United States, they are legally, sort of take on the, there's a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United, where they are treated as citizens in that sense, in terms of how they can contribute to political campaigns. So which is a problematic decision, I think, when you look at all the the financial contributions in the political system here. But I really look at it more from like a cultural perspective, and how we are able to communicate with them on a very personal level, and can exchange ideas that go beyond just the exchange and purchase of goods or services.
You talk about goods and services, so which leads me to ask you, Beth. So, I mean, always when we were growing up, we were talking about USP, the unique selling proposition, and in an over commoditized world, we believe, in fact, in the ethos and the narrative that we practice at IST Global Consulting, that USP is passe, and probably it's the day and age of UFP, which is a unique feelings proposition.
Okay.
How brands connect and make you feel. So do you allude to that, or you have a conversation on this that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here. That's the first time I've heard that way of looking at it. But I mean, that makes perfect sense to me, right? And like, if I mean, this isn't new thinking, but in my book, I talk about, the fact that, brands very much make us feel a certain way, and the most successful brands make emotional connections with their customers, right? It goes way beyond,
Price and features and benefits.
Yeah, no, exactly. And how many products I buy from a certain from a certain retailer. I have this interesting story going back to my upbringing. So my family, my father was very we just always had Volkswagen cars. And that was just, I don't know exactly why he never articulated it to me, but it was sort of like, it wasn't as luxurious as an Audi, but it was a well-made car, and it was the car for the people. So we always had those. So I kind of grew up with this like emotional connection to this brand. And when, if you remember a couple of years ago, that whole scandal came out with
the Dieselgate, yeah.
Yes, exactly. It hurt me personally. I felt so sad, because I felt like this brand that I grew up with, that I, had sort of inherited from my father, and I was going to continue this legacy of, driving this particular car. It made me emotionally so sad that this brand had broken my trust,
Right, absolutely.
Which was, I mean, a super strange experience to me, but I think it speaks to exactly what you're talking about, right? That it goes way beyond, the exchange of goods and, purchase power that we have. It's a deeply emotional thing that we've developed with brands.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful example you shared, Brett. Thanks so much. I know you. This is your first book, and I'm sure it is going to be a seminal work, and you'll have many more coming in. I wanted to understand: was this book somewhere else simmering for a long period of time, or was there a trigger, pivotal moment that actually helped you? Okay, I need to kind of get this and pen it and bring it into the zeitgeist. What is it like?
Yeah, just like most things in life, the story isn't quite as linear. So it all sort of started. So a few years ago, I have sort of an innate fear of public speaking. I don't really like being on, stages at conferences and things like that. So my business partner sort of suggested that I work with a speaking coach that he knows. And the idea was working with her and a very lovely woman called Jill Wesley out in Berkeley, San Francisco area. So I worked with her with the idea that I would sort of try to get my thoughts on branding on paper, and then we would turn that into, kind of a presentation that I could give at conferences. And sort of halfway through the process, I realized that I still didn't like the idea of talking about myself. And I still didn't like, it just didn't feel right. And I'm much better when I have a concrete sort of product, tangible process. So that's where I came up with the idea of a book. Why don't we turn this into a book? And I had already started, putting a lot of thoughts down on paper. And then that's how it turned into a book. And then, that process was probably another 3 years of just kind of trying to figure out, because I had never written a book, obviously, but what the structure was going to be, how it was going to, how visuals were going to, play off the verbal parts. So that was, kind of another 2.5 years probably. And then last spring during the pandemic, I started reaching out to publishers, and Fast Company Press was interested. And then I worked with their editor for another 6 months or so, giving it sort of the final shape. It wasn't like I woke up one day and had the idea of writing a book. That wasn't.
Right. Good. Okay. So there is encouragement for others like us. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, listen, what I would say is keep putting your thoughts down. And then I feel like, one day, if you feel very extremely brave, start figuring out how everything fits together. That was kind of the biggest challenge, because I had written all these kind of fragments and paragraphs, and ultimately, how do you turn all of that into a more cohesive narrative? That was sort of the biggest challenge.
Absolutely. At that point. I love the word that you used there, brave. So talking about brave, I wanted to ask you next, Beat, creativity is the only thing that is future-proof. The rest probably gets obsolete, right? What do you have to say to that?
Again, hadn't thought of that before, but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think, the sort of the human ingenuity to, not just ingenuity, but also curiosity, right? I feel like, to me, curiosity is probably the most important part of the creative process, right? And if you keep asking yourself why, like, there's that cliche of kids when they're small, they keep asking why. And I really do feel like that is something that we tend to sort of lose as we get older. But I think in the creative process, it's absolutely essential to keep asking yourself the question of why you're doing something, why something is a certain way, why things have been done a certain way before and why they can't be different. So absolutely. And in terms of, creativity is going to be the only way we're, going to find solutions to the most pressing problems we have, this day and age, whether that's climate crisis, the way we communicate in the public sphere through all these social media platforms, how we moderate, whether there needs to be, better rules or laws, around it. So that's a beautiful way of saying it. And thank you for sharing that with me. I've never heard it before, and I absolutely agree with that.
You're welcome. I wrote a column on called Beyond Advertising. It's a 3-part series. I'll share that with you. And it's uncanny that you mentioned about curiosity, because that's something that I've used in that. I'll share that with you over an email. Take a look at it, and I'll love your comments on that.
Yeah, I'd love that. Please do.
Yeah, because what we talk about is that the future. How does one make something future proof? Simply because the cutting edge becomes mainstream so quickly.
Right. Yeah.
At the snap of a finger, right? It's you constantly. I mean, by design, you need to be agile, alert. Alacrity is the name of the game. So I think there is no pause. Uh, you're continuously on the churn, isn't it?
Yeah,
In
no,
fact,
absolutely.
as a designer, I'm very curious to understand from you, Bea. Can one, and I see this as a vacuum area, and I would love your thoughts on this, designing for trust and empathy.
Designing for what?
Trust and empathy.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, just to extend that thought as a small analogy could be that whosoever thought that 8-10 years back would be actually getting into a stranger's car or a stranger's home, and let alone sleep on his bed. So
Right.
whether it's an Uber or an Airbnb, or okay, right? So but obviously, the interface, the user interface, the experience has been made in a manner wherein I think you begin to do that, and now it is always almost a de rigueur.
Right.
So I feel that, do you think brands need to be looking at that rather than just be in that existing systemic thinking and defaulted template? This is the way we always done it, and let's follow that template.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. If I think I have a section in my book that's basically that brands can only be built on a foundation of trust and truth, right? Like without that, everything falls apart. Meaning, let's go back to my example of Volkswagen, right? Like that trust is broken, and I don't know what repairs it. You know what I mean? So you're absolutely right. I think about that, and I thought about that more after my kids were a little bit bigger. If you take a step back and think about the superhuman level of trust we place onto other people, right? That they will take care of your children, that your food will be safe, that the airplane has been inspected properly, that the traffic lights work. I mean, it is incredible how we can place that much trust in the systems around us that we can't control. You know what I mean?
Right,
It's just absolutely amazing. And so you're right. I mean, as a brand, that has to be your number one concern is, to build trust in a product. And you're absolutely right. Like 10 years ago, I mean, probably for some people, 5 years ago, they were like, really, am I going to get into a stranger's car that I have absolutely no idea whether he was vetted? Sure, the company tells me they were, but, we've also heard of incidents where,
right.
There were problems with that. It has to be your number one goal, and I think the only way you can do it is, again, I have this part in my book that I talk about branding. To me, is sort of the process to get at the truth of a brand. You boil it down to its essence, and that has to be 100% truthful. And if it's not, if at any point you break that trust, then it absolutely everything falls apart. So absolutely, I think it's essential, and we can't live without it.
Right, absolutely. I mean, can you imagine the pilot saying we have chance of, of landing right or taking off right?
No, exactly. I mean, that's just incredible, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, again, we talked about social media, the velocity and the ferocity of content being put out by brands and organizations. Is it coming at the cost of true compelling storytelling?
I think I would say there's probably, pros and cons to that, right? So I feel like, in my view, part of the problem, or part of the challenge, if you will, with social media, in my view, is that we have started to speak in shortcuts, more and
Literally
more.
and figuratively, yeah.
Yeah, literally and figuratively, right? So in that sense, that's why I also feel like, branding is more and more important than ever, because the process of branding really is able to distill something very complex down into like a visual cue, right? Or a visual marker, which is super, super important. The problem I see, though, is that it's very, very it's challenging to have more complex conversation when we're all talking in sound bites, in visual and verbal sound bites. And a lot of the problems or challenges we face as a global community are just really, really complex, and you cannot condense them down into 140 characters, or you cannot condense them down into, a logo or, a mark for something. So, I feel like there are amazing stories to be told, on social media, and a lot of brands are doing fantastic work on that. I just feel like the sheer volume of information and stories that we are being bombarded with every day, it's very difficult for us to absorb all of that, and I feel like we're losing the ability to have more nuanced and complex conversations and storytelling, because of the sheer volume and the uninterrupted way that we're being fed stories, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. In fact, the more connected we are, the more dealing we seem to be.
Right.
I mean, it's such a oxymoron, but I think that's what the feel, because the standing, as I call it, like, standing naked in your own truth is not something that a platform like social media encourages.
Right.
So authenticity at a premium, which means obviously there is trust deficit. Look at the kind of domino effect that it has, actually. And therefore, storytelling goes out for a toss, because storytelling is about authenticity, connection, cohesivity, so I think, you're right, absolutely. I think the opportunity is there, and some of the brands are doing a fantastic job of it. But I think more and more people can get into that mainstream and make it. I think that becomes DNA rather than an exception.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And the other challenge too, then, I mean, you're talking about storytelling, right? And whether it's brands or people that are brands, or just people that are behaving like brands, is I sort of I refer to it as human, as individuals. I feel like we're constantly trying to curate highlight reels of our lives, right? So like, when you go on vacation, you show the beautiful shot of the beach or whatnot, but you're not going to share the nightmare travel, the nightmare travel scenario that you went through to get there. And so in that sense, there is a certain performative aspect now to all our lives, which I think is not entirely healthy. But then also I feel like we're not getting an authentic view of how other people live and other people's challenges, and and does that make it harder for us to sort of connect to each other, around our struggles and not just around our, highlight reels? I don't know. It's just a question I have.
Exactly. I think, vulnerability and type A plus personality forced by the Wall Street, right? It's contradicting, right? If I'm a
Yeah.
CEO or a leader, I cannot be vulnerable. I'm I'm an ordinary mortal, right? I mean, stock index is determined by this. She or he is superhuman. Batman, superhuman, Superman, all combined. So vulnerability is not encouraged.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
and
you're absolutely right.
authenticity and trust is, vulnerability is probably the epicenter of, I think, authenticity and trust.
Yeah. This is interesting. It reminds me of this one point. When I first, when we first started our company, and I was sort of forced, more or less, to transition from a designer to a creative director. First of all, I did not like that at all, and only thinking about it later in life, I realized that one of the reasons I hated it so much was because I felt like, as a creative director, I had to like walk into a situation or walk into a room and have all the answers. And I hated that feeling because, and I've only learned later now that the more authentic way to do it, and the more curious way to do it, and the more vulnerable way to do it, is to walk into a situation and say, I have no idea what the right answer is. Let's figure it out together. You know what I mean? So that, in terms of, not showing vulnerability, I've actually felt like that's what hurt me, and that's what made that transition so hard. And showing vulnerability is actually a much more, personal, human way to interact with, with the people I work with. I mean, that's for me personally. It may work differently for other people, but that's what I found out.
Yeah. I think that's the way to go. Actually, that's the way to go. Have you considered, Beat, forward integrating, somewhere else into other platforms like podcast or a TV property or something like that? Because I know it's come out in the form of a book, and it's so visually enriching. Do you think you would like to kind of take it forward into some kind of audible and audiovisual format?
The themes
Am
of
I
the
putting
book.
thoughts into your head?
Well, as I said earlier, I really feel like I'm only at the beginning of this journey, and there's a lot, even since the book was officially, finished and published. Like, some of my thinking has evolved. I just because of my because I'm hesitant still about public speaking, and I'm not sure that that's the most comfortable place for me to extend my thinking to, but maybe I don't know
Okay.
yet.
All right. You mentioned about public speaking, which leads me to my next question. So, which is the role that you enjoy most? Designer, writer, speaker?
Designing, definitely. That's the designing is my happy place. I when I can tune out the world around me and just work with shape and color, and that is my happy place. Writing has always been a big part of my life, and I actually feel like, that's just my personal opinion. I feel like as a designer, it's extremely helpful to be able to write. And I actually feel like in a design education, that's something that's not being encouraged, which I think is, I think it would be really helpful, because you will always need words in some shape or form to accompany your designs, right? Whether it's writing a presentation or making an argument for why one solution is better than the other, telling a story around, we talked about storytelling, right? Like I work on, I work on a lot of logos. Most of the logos that, we work on, I'm intimately involved in, because I that's my favorite thing to do. But, the best way to talk about a logo and make a case for why one approach is better than the other is to tell a story, right? You need to create an emotional connection between the client and a particular execution, right? Of why, one logo represents, gets to the bottom, to the truth of the brand more so than another one. If it's just about, do you like this typeface or, this color, it just turns into such a subjective, such a subjective decision that in most cases, neither you or the client will be happy, right? There needs to be a real strong emotional connection. So point being, design number one, writing number two, public speaking still a distant three at this point.
Okay, that's a gold, silver, bronze, right? So just before we conclude, Bayad, I want to understand what is something that you really, really kind of gave you incredible amount of joy, most inspiring piece of work that you've done over the years, something that this is like the eureka moment. And, this is something that I'd love to do, and it's one of the most inspiring pieces of work over the years.
Wow.
I know. It's like, which is your favorite kid kind of a question.
That's a tough one. I'll just mention one project. And again, I don't know if that's the most, I'm not sure if it's truly the most, most, I don't know what you asked, the most important or the most
inspiring, or
inspiring. Yeah. I just remember so I don't know if it does all of those things. It's just one that sticks in my head right now, and where I actually felt a sort of wow. I did have a kind of wow moment, and that was this was last year actually, during the pandemic. We rebranded MTV USA, but also MTV globally. And part of the assignment was we actually cleaned up the MTV logo itself. So, we talk about social media, but a lot of things that brands need to think about these days is, it needs to work on a billboard, but it also needs to work at 25 pixels, right? So we just cleaned up the actual MTV logo and sort of built it up back from the ground up, just to make sure that it's as crisp as it can on small platforms. But I just remember having that sort of wow moment when I was actually working on the MTV logo, because that MTV is the brand that I grew up with, Yeah. So, and then to think ahead that 20-25 years later, I would have the opportunity to literally work on reshape the MTV logo for like only the third time in history, where the MTV logo was physically altered. that was kind of an aha moment for me, you know. And it was also during the pandemic, and you know, working, you know, at home all the time. It was one of those yeah, those kind of little moments where I was like, wow, you know. So I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we grew up on that brand, and yeah, I think, you know, adaptability quotient for brands, you know, when it comes to identity, you know, that becomes a huge asset, because you're typically conventionally otherwise creating it for, say, a mainstream, and then at the cost of overlooking what is probably your mobile and, as you mentioned, 25 pixels. So I
Yeah,
think if you're able to cut across and your identity is telling that story, whether it irrespective of size or granularity, I think that's a beautiful way of articulating a brand, you know. This is very
yeah.
stimulating, Beth. Thanks so much for doing this. Thank you for talking to BrandKnew.
Well,
And
thank you.
you know, thank you so much, and we'll remain in touch. Thanks so much. I'll just stop it right here now, and then we can pick up.